and welcome to Into You, the podcast where I take a deep dive into getting to know the best you. My name is Adam Strawn, and today I am chatting with one of the UK's best and most talented writers and directors, who was also born in Newcastle upon Tyne, which is my neck of the woods. So if we get very northeastern, just bear with us. But he is the writer and director behind such movies as Dog Soldiers, The Descent, one of my favourite movies of all time, which we will talk about very shortly, Centurion, Doomsday, and his most recent movie, Duchess, as well as directing a lot of episodes for television for shows such as Constantine, Hannibal, Lost in Space, and Game of Thrones. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome to the podcast Mr. Neil Marshall. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm very grateful to be here.
Absolutely. No, this is an absolute joy for me to speak to you, Neil, because I kind of have outlined a little bit earlier, like prior to us talking, but The Descent is one of my favorite movies of all time. Certainly in my top horror movies of all time, could even be number one. It's a movie I revisit so often. I love that movie so much, and obviously we'll get into that shortly. But it's just a pleasure for me to be able to talk about a movie that you made and talk about that art. So I am super, super excited for this. I can't wait to get into it. But
well, I mean, it's amazing for me to still be, talking about it. Like
right.
This year is its 20th anniversary. It's like, that people still, hold it close to their hearts and still want to talk about it now is, as a filmmaker, that's like about as good as it gets, really.
That's the dream, isn't it? To still have your art and your words talked about like that, and how it's so relevant still today to talk about. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll absolutely get into the reasons behind that. I'm sure we will. But
Okay.
yeah, just to obviously touch a little bit, Neil, you were in Paris at the end of last year. How was that? Did you have a great experience?
Yeah, that was actually for they were kind of jumping the gun a bit because they wanted to do a Descent anniversary screening, and I saw
Oh,
that
really?
it's the following year, but they were like, whatever, we'll just do it this year anyway. But yeah, I mean, it was lovely to go to Paris, quick trip to Paris in December time as well. It was looking beautiful.
Mm.
So yeah, it was kind of, and it was a really nice screening. The festival was great. I've been there once before. Very accommodating, really good crowd, great venue. It's just like, it was perfect. It was great fun.
Amazing. I've only ever been to Paris one time, and it was back in for 2017 or 18, but I absolutely adored the city. Like, it's just, there's a buzz, there's a vibe. Do you know what I mean?
No, completely. But it's like for you, it's a bit more tricky. Like for me, it's like I've got no excuse because you just hop on the train and go directly. That's
Is that what you did, the Eurostar from London?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, what a treat.
It just makes the most sense, really.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you're there in such little time, and you get to ride the train to Paris. Like, that's amazing. Do it if
I
you
know.
can.
No, it's not.
All right, Neil. I want to touch on basically going back to your younger years. Let's talk about younger Neil, baby Neil. I want to get into kind of more, what was the initial kind of steps for you wanting to become a filmmaker? And were there any particular movies that when you were younger you watched and you were like, wow, like this is what I want to do?
Um, yeah, I mean, I have told this story before, so you might have heard it already. But I basically I fell in love with going to the movies when I saw Star Wars.
Mm,
So I was born in 1970, so which made me it was eight. I was 8 years old. Or actually, I was just about to turn 8 years old when I was taken to see Star Wars for the first time at what was the Odeon in Newcastle, which
oh,
is no longer there.
yeah.
Uh, and I totally fell in love with the idea of movies, of going to the cinema, on that night. I mean, it's had such an impression on me. Um, but beyond that, that was it. It was just movies and going to the cinema. That was it. And I started going to the cinema a lot. And then, asking my parents to take me to see stuff and things like that. So I really got into watching movies at the end of the 70s. And then I saw, when I was age 11, I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark for the
Mm,
first time. And that was combined with seeing the making of Raiders of the Lost Ark on TV. And I think just that symbiosis or whatever it is of like seeing the making of, seeing how it was done, saying, well, this is what I saw. I was like, it immediately became my favorite movie of all time. And
mm,
then this is how they made it. And I was like, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. I want to do that for a living. And that's where it began. I was 11 years old. My best mate, who's still a very close friend of mine, Mike, was with me at the time. We were both into movies, and we started making films. like a couple of weeks later, we got hold of his mum's old 8mm camera. I mean, it's kind of a cliche now because we've heard various people tell this story, but like I think if you were a child of the 70s, like that's how we started.
Mm,
8mm films, started making, initially kind of like low budget or no budget, like Indiana Jones type films, as much as we could, filming in our back gardens or down the local woods or wherever,
mm,
with cheap props and stuff like that, trying to make our own films, and then kind of graduating into telling our own stories a bit more and stuff like that. So I spent my teenage years basically making films on Super 8,
mm.
um, learning the whole process from the ground up of writing and then directing and then editing and putting. I did a lot of my own like miniature effects and started to come up with some visual effects ideas that we could do on the films and things like that. So it was a real learning curve of making all the mistakes, making some real shit. But you look at it now and it's really funny, but it's not good.
Mm.
So, and then utilizing that to get into film school later on.
Right, nice. Do you still have any of that like old, I suppose, shit that you've made? Like, do you still have any of that, or is it like
I
just
do.
gone to
Yeah,
the?
yeah. No, I've
Yeah.
got some of it on. Got a few bits and pieces on Vimeo and stuff like that. And um, I think, well, actually, none of it's been kind of released publicly, but I might at some point
Yeah.
put something out there just for a laugh because it is humorous.
Yeah. No, I love that. Like, it's that kind of like old like VHS era of like making film. And like I love like, when you watch a movie and it feels like, oh, this was made for like a VHS era. Like it's got that
Mm,
aesthetic about it. Like I love that, like especially those old horror movies that you feel and you're watching and it feels gritty and it feels grimy, but in the best way. So I love that
yeah.
era. And guerrilla filmmaking, like it's the best way. You've got to explore and just play around, right? And find out like what works and
No,
like what you
definitely.
enjoy.
Definitely, and I think my first movie, Dog Soldiers, obviously is jumping the gun a little bit there, but like that
Mm.
fits into that ethos of being very grainy and kind of raw
Mm.
looking. Despite it looks like it was made about 10 years before it was actually made. So yeah, but
Dog
yeah, that
Soldiers
whole
is a
thing
classic.
because then off the back, during that time as well was the birth of home video and video rentals and video nasties, and I got to see all these
Yeah.
horror films and stuff, and that clearly worked its way in there as well
Mm.
at the same time. And then went to film school, met some other horror fanatics, and ended up for my graduation film made a 20-minute zombie action movie. Uh,
Yes.
so yeah,
I love that. So that's interesting actually, because like, we've touched on there about like, you have an interest in love and horror. For all that you mentioned, like Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark as well, which are these big movies that you kind of fall into their worlds and you kind of live in there. Like even after the movie's over, you're still kind of in that world, so to speak. So I can see like
mm,
how that was all encompassing and that was like, oh my God, I've just experienced this whole thing. I've been in this other world in the cinema and I want to do that. I want to make that. And it's interesting because those genres are obviously, big, like space, like epic, like operas, like action, like movies. And it's interesting that you're talking there really about horror and like Dog Soldiers, like as you say you've made, which was that gritty. I love Dog Soldiers. What a movie. For me, the depiction of the werewolves in Dog Soldiers is that's what scares me when I think of werewolves. So you got me. But
that's good.
yeah. But as well, like talking about genre. So like obviously, you don't just work exclusively in horror or one particular genre. You do move around. You've got a war movie, you've got gangster, you've got like horror, you've got all these different things going on here. So when it comes to like writing for like a specific genre, do you have like, a process of where you think like, oh, like this is what I do to write for horror, or do you just start with like a character and then somehow the genre comes out along the way? Like what's your process for that?
Um, I never wanted to be seen as just a horror director. I mean, it was
Yeah.
kind of a way in, but I never wanted to be seen as just a horror director. And it's so easy that people get pigeonholed. I think once you start out doing something, it's like, oh, well, that's what you are.
Yeah.
Uh, so I always wanted to deviate and do various other genres. And the dream is to do something like Raiders of the Lost Ark, to do a big
Yeah.
adventure movie.
Yeah,
But
man.
ultimately horror movies are cheaper to make, so therefore easier to make, and have maybe better commercial prospects on
Mm,
as a rule than trying to make big adventure movies. Um, but but yeah, I think the one thing that links all my work is action because
yeah.
that's really what I love doing. And I always try, no matter what genre I'm doing, I'm trying to get action stuff in there and build it around the action because, yeah, that's absolutely what I love more than anything. Any one
Hmm.
genre is just action itself. So, I got action into Descent and Dog Soldiers and then Doomsday and Centurion and stuff like that. So no matter what film I'm making, it's going to have action in it somehow if I can.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was always the thing. And when I'm writing scripts, that's kind of the basis I come from is what kind of movies do I want to watch that aren't being made and I haven't seen before. Um, and so that was definitely the birth of Dog Soldiers.
Hmm.
Was I want to see a movie about soldiers fighting werewolves, and then I want to see a horror movie about women in a cave, or I want to see a post-apocalyptic adventure set in the UK as opposed to
Hmm.
the US or Australia or wherever it is, or to see with Centurion to do like a great like outdoors adventure movie but set in the UK, which is again there's not many of them, if any.
Yeah.
Like they're very few and far between because we don't have much wilderness in the UK, and so we kind of have to look to the past to find it.
Hmm.
Um, so it's like that kind of thing was like, can I do like a Western chase movie but in the UK? So Centurion encompasses all sorts of things of that.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so I'm always like looking to how can I crowbar the action in there really?
You know what? Like you saying that, that makes complete sense because action is the through line through all of your movies. Like when I think of like some of the great scenes from your movies, like they're pinned down by the action a lot of the time. Like to talk about Centurion briefly, me and my best friend, we went to see that at the cinema, and I remember like back like must have been like 2010,
Mhm.
and we loved it. And one of the great things I love about that movie in particular is that it would be so easy to focus on the big battle, the big war, everything. But what I love about Centurion is that that is happening over here, but we're following the story of characters here that are kind of running alongside it, when like
Yeah,
their adventure alongside that. And I love that. Plus Michael Fassbender, I could watch him in anything. I mean, he's phenomenal. But that's what I loved about that. It was like this almost like isolated story happening alongside the bigger story. And the more not to be detrimental about other movies, but like the more obvious route would be to focus on the big fight, right? Which we've seen a million times. But I
yeah.
love that you took this more as like, let's focus like more narrowly on these characters and their story alongside that. And I thought that was really clever. I really loved it for that.
It was heavily inspired by the Warriors,
Yes.
which was in turn heavily inspired by the Greek story of Xenophon, and Walter Hill admits that as well. He said that's the story he made of
Hmm.
the band of soldiers basically behind enemy lines trying to fight their
Yeah.
way to freedom. And so yeah, it was just shooting in reverse in the sense that the biggest battle takes place at the beginning of the film. And then it gets less and less and less. So I mean, in some respects, it kind of follows the horror movie trope of picking off the characters one by one until you end up with like the last survivor. But it's a survival movie, horror movie. So yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I just want to say, like, I want to pick up on the way you said the word battle because I say battle like that, and my partner always picks me up on it. So I love that you just said it like that because we have that accent.
I
It's
don't know
not
how else to
battle.
say it.
Exactly. It's not battle, it's battle. That's how you say it. Like I say bottle, and you probably say bottle as well, but I love that. Just to pick up on the accent whenever I can. I need backup, Neil. Here in New York, I need backup. um, but yeah, talking about directing. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier in the opening, there you've done some incredibly big TV shows. Just to even mention Game of Thrones, like those episodes that you've directed are battle episodes. Like
Mhm.
stuff is going down, and you got to reunite with Liam Cunningham as well, who is phenomenal, who nails our
Absolute legend.
accent. Absolute legend,
Total,
right?
yeah. And one of the few people who can do a decent Northeast accent.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Um,
But tell me,
and
yeah,
I've
like
had him
how?
do all sorts of accents. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
yeah, well, yeah, obviously, like his true accent is like thick Irish.
yeah.
But he played sort of like stiff upper lip Brit in Dog Soldiers,
Hmm.
and he kind of toned it down a little bit in Centurion, and then he's like Geordie in Game of Thrones. So,
Right.
I'm always keen to work with him, and at some point, I'd like to have him play his actual accent, which would be good.
But yeah, what a guy. But that must be so nice for you to reunite with him on the set of Game of Thrones. But yeah, like talk to me about that, Neil. So like obviously, you've got your kind of your idea of going into like making films, and that was, I guess, your first inspiration was like going to see the big movies. But how do you find that process differs from like working on television, which is so much more, I guess, can be. I mean, Game of Thrones is a big scale, but compared to a movie, it's a different kind of scale. And you're working maybe with more actors, less actors, different actors. You've got a lot more extras in some circumstances. How do you find the difference in your process going into both?
Um, I suppose in terms of my process, well, I mean, the weird thing about TV these days is like the Game of Thrones episodes I did were probably bigger than any of the films I've done.
Right.
It's because TV's was had exploded at that point budget wise, and Game of Thrones was the biggest thing on it. So,
Yeah.
certainly the second episode of Game of Thrones that I did was like bigger than anything I'd done on
Mm.
film, even something like Doomsday. But my process, I guess, the difference is with the exception of Hellboy, all the movies that I've made, I've written myself,
Yes.
and so you very much kind of live and breathe these projects for 2 3 years of your life from writing through to release, and when it's your movie, it's like it's your baby, and it's like you have to oversee every single aspect of it, and you have dreams and nightmares about it because it's so ingrained in your conscious and your subconscious, and you can't turn it off. So, but with TV, it's a little bit different because it's not your baby, it's somebody else's baby, be that the writer or the showrunner, whatever it is. But it's you're going there to fulfill their vision as opposed to your own.
Yeah.
And what I find there is the best thing to do is you park your ego at the door and you go in and you do the best job you possibly can as a director. But because it's not your baby, you do get to sleep better at night, and you get to, go home after work and, live a life beyond that. It's like you're still doing as much prep as you would normally do. But there's a different kind of pressure on it because it's for somebody else, and you're actually kind of focusing almost 100, focusing 100% on just the job of being a director. Whereas on the films, I'm focusing on being a writer, a director, an editor. I'm looking at every single aspect of it that is within my kind of field of control. Whereas on the TV thing, it's purely the directing, and then once you're done, you get 3 days in the edit or whatever it is to do a director's cut, and then you hand it over, and you don't see it again. And that's in the US. In the UK, they do it a little bit differently. If you're working on a big TV show in the UK, they're expected to be there from prep, production, post production, right through the end. So it's more like a feature for a director in the UK for TV stuff. But I haven't actually done any TV in the UK yet. So that's the weird thing. I've only ever worked on US productions.
Right. That makes sense. Obviously, like, and big ones as well, like Constantine, Hannibal, like some real big shows there as well. And
Yeah,
that's
Black Sails was massive.
Yeah,
You know?
huge. Wow. And like, something like Black Sails as well, which is such a show that moves around. Do you know what I mean? Like there's so much
Yeah.
travel in that show. So that makes complete sense in terms of scale and, touching on Game of Thrones as well. I mean, those episodes that you did, I mean, one, incredible. Like those big battle, scenes you've got to really have for me, and this is what comes across in watching them, like that urge and that desire and that passion for directing action, and that's obviously that's your
Yeah,
background,
I
that's your
think so. I mean, some directors don't like that epic
Mm.
stuff. It's not, they'd rather be doing, some performance led thing of people in a room, whatever it is, and that's fantastic, and each to their own. But I love the big stuff, and actually, the
Yeah.
bigger the better. Like I kind of really get off on orchestrating carnage on a grand level, grand
Mm.
canvas like that. As give me thousands of extras, give me explosions and helicopters or dragons or whatever the hell it is that you're doing this week. But I find that big stuff. I don't know. I'm very comfortable with the scale of things.
Mm.
Doesn't bother me, and in fact, I really enjoy the logistics of it. And then maybe it's because it becomes weirdly becomes more like a kind of military operation when you're doing stuff of that scale. And I don't know, there's a strong military background in my family, so I'm wondering if it's like it seeps through that way.
Guess that makes sense as well. I mean, doing Dog Soldiers, having like soldiers in there fighting, it makes complete sense. Doing Centurion, it's all coming out in you there, Neil. We can see it absolutely.
Oh,
And the
definitely.
ensemble.
I grew up listening to stories about my granddad, who I never met because he fought in the Battle of the Somme.
Wow.
It was when he was a teenager or whatever, and but he passed away before I was born. And my dad also served in the army just after
Mm.
World War II, and I grew up on these stories, this and the sense of humor, the kind of crazy sense of humor, and that kind of stuff. So that definitely fed into certainly into Dog Soldiers and into Centurion as well.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting what you've just said there because we are influenced by like, our history and the stories that we hear, and we kind of seek that out in media sometimes. Like my background, obviously I'm from the northeast of England, like so I'm from an ex-coal mining village. So when
Mm,
like stuff like Billy Elliot came out, obviously I don't have a background in ballet or anything like that, but to see the miners' strikes and everything like that on TV and depicted like that, I felt like that was my culture being seen, and that was like
yeah,
I could see that. So, and to hear that like stories from my grandfather who worked down the mines, and then from my dad who was like the last in my generation, who was like the last miner before it all got packed up. So
yeah.
it's so interesting what you said there, and like I feel like I could watch Billy Elliot with somebody else who might not be from England, say, but I feel like that deeper connection because I feel like that's my culture represented. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, 100%. I did feel some kind of obligation to, when I was writing Dog Soldiers, I really wanted to do an authentic depiction of squaddies because
Yeah.
I'd not seen that really in a film. I think, the close, not, I don't know, maybe not in Zulu or something like that, but like there was a one-off TV movie called An Ungentlemanly Act about the Falklands War, and that kind of tapped into what squaddies were really like a bit. So I was kind of like, I really wanted to depict that because I'd seen, 28 Days Later, and I was like,
Mm.
the way the British Army are depicted in that as like literally a bunch of psychopaths. After 28 days, they've all gone rogue and turned into like rapist murderers. I was like, doesn't really ring true. So like one of them maybe, but not all of them. So
Mm.
I really kind of reacted to that and was like, okay, if I'm gonna do squaddies, let's do them as they are.
Yeah.
And it seems the squaddies like really responded to that because it became like it was like the number one movie amongst the squaddies out in Iraq and Afghanistan and stuff like that. They were watching it on a loop, which
Mm.
made me incredibly proud. I was like, I really like to watch it with them sometime.
That's interesting. I have to say, like, before we'll move on to like my movie, my favorite movie, but the one scene I love in Dog Soldiers is when, it's when the squaddy just puts his fists up and gets ready to fist fight with that's for me, it's just that in a way, it's almost quintessentially British, like squaddy. It's like, right, come on, then let's go. And I just love like that not backing down, like I'm going to fight till the end. And I just love that. Like when I saw that the first time, I burst out laughing, like just because it rang true. Do you know what I mean? I was like, oh my God, I see that and I
Well,
love
and
this.
that was kind of it was amalgamation of different things. It was always in the script that he was going to have a fight with the werewolf, but
Yeah,
when I cast Darren Morfitt in the role, he's a boxer.
that makes
So
sense.
I think it was going to be a bit more, I don't know, a bit more stylized maybe. But when I found out he was a boxer, I was like, oh, that's perfect because he can box the werewolf because I've never seen that before, and
Yeah.
Darren could make it look convincing. And it was just, and Darren's not a big fella. He's not tiny, but he's not big. And I just had this thing of like him being like kind of like a Jack Russell. He's a bit like it's that terrier mentality of like
Mm.
he's just gonna give him shit no matter what. And all of that kind of blended into the character and the moment in the film, and I just think it feels good because of that. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of a British sensibility thing of like just have a go if you think you're hard enough.
Exactly that. Yeah. And it works so damn well.
Yeah.
Um, all right, Neil, I need to talk to you about The Descent. So,
Okay.
oh, this
What can I
movie,
tell
like,
you?
well, this movie, I have so many questions and a lot to talk about. Like, this podcast alone could have been all about The Descent, but I need to tell you, first of all, like, this movie, when I saw it for the first time, like, I was like, wow, like, it's so great to see a horror movie that has so many levels to it. So like
Hmm.
even just the title of The Descent. Of course we have the literal descent of the girls going down into the cave, but we also have, you know, the descent into madness, and like there's all of these different things like, connected just to the title of The Descent. This easily could have been a movie that was just about girls going down to a cave and fighting monsters, but it's not. There's so much more to it, and that's what I love about it. the character of like Sarah goes from like, she's a different character by the end. She's like fully primal. And I love that. It's the descent in her character. And that's not a negative. That's just a, descent in a change in her character. And that's what I really love about this. But there's just so much to it that I adore. I love that. I love the ending, the real ending, which we'll talk about. I love, just the claustrophobic feeling of it, the sense of dread that lingers over the movie. You're forever feeling like something is going to happen. And when it does,
Yeah.
the build to that is so well done. So yeah, I just want to ask you to start off with like talk me through the concept of like writing and putting this movie together in the script.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose looking back now, part of me is like, well, how did I come up with that? It was so long ago, and it was like a perfect storm of ideas all kind of coming into one thing. But so the origins of it were after doing Dog Soldiers. I read a review of Dog Soldiers, and I can't remember who wrote it or what. I can't even remember exactly what it said. But the implication was that Dog Soldiers was a good debut, but like when's a British filmmaker going to make a really scary horror film? Because there's whatever. Like I don't think Dog Soldiers is particularly scary. I think it's got so much humor in it as well. It kind
Yeah.
of counterbalance. It's gnarly. It's got gore and stuff like that. But I don't know if it's scary. Um, at least that's the way I saw it anyway. And I thought, okay, that's the gauntlet's been thrown down. Like, how can I make a truly, truly scary film? And I look back on the films that scared me the most, and it's all from a certain period of time, and it's things like The Thing and Deliverance and the first Alien and stuff like that. And I was like,
Mm.
okay, so these are the films that really got under my skin, and like, how can I take something of that and put them into something of my own? Um, and I did have, so I was approached by a company called Salador Films after Dog Soldiers. They said, they'd love to do my next film. They're a new company. They had money. It's actually the company that invented Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Oh
And
wow.
so the audience, the owner of that company was like, I want to make feature films, and Dog Soldiers has done really well. Let's talk to Neil. Let's see what he's got ideas wise. So I had a meeting with them, the producer Christian Coulson. Had a meeting with him, and I pitched him. Initially, I pitched him the feature-length version of my student movie, which was like, or zombies on an oil rig thing. And he, as much as he liked it, he just say, look, it's too expensive. There's just no way we can do this. So I left that meeting. I was still living up in Newcastle at the time, so I left that meeting, hopped on the train at King's Cross to go back to Newcastle, and within the 3-hour train ride, I'd come up with the idea for The Descent. It was like a horror movie set in a cave. Group of people go down a cave, and then at some point it was like, what if it's just a women? Because I think also because Dog Soldiers had been very kind of like macho blokes, testosterone kind of thing. I was like, let's do the flip of that. Why not have it all women? Because also you're researching that world of cavers and climbers or whatever. I was just, seeing all this, like there were, women were out there doing exactly what the men were doing. And I was like, yeah, so it's totally plausible. So why not have it an all-female group, which again was kind of unique, and started hammering out a story and a treatment, which then became a script. And I think all of the elements that you're talking about were in that first draft. It didn't really, it took a while to refine, but the ultimate structure and story of it was always, there's going to be a tragedy. Sarah's going to lose her family. She's going to end up going on this caving expedition, and it's going to become this physical descent and psychological descent, a descent into savagery, a descent into almost primal instincts. I've always been interested in the notion of what people will do to survive when it comes to the crunch. How far they'll
Yeah.
go,
Hmm.
what they'll put themselves through for that extra moment of life, and whether they will turn on their friends or their family or anybody just to live. So I was always interested in that concept and how I could apply that to this. And yeah, and it just kind of fell into place. And I can't remember. I think the first draft or whatever was quite difficult to write, but then it became a little bit easier along the way. So yeah, it was just refining and refining and refining. We spent about 2 years writing the script, and getting it. Well, the Dog Soldiers had 6 years to work on the script before I made it, so it
Right.
was 2 years. It felt like a picnic to me. Um, and also knowing, I guess, that I knew that there was a production company attached and it was going to get made. So,
Hmm.
but I also knew I was working to limitations. I knew what the budget level was roughly going to be. That I know I had to make it contained, but contained within the caves. And yeah, and that's kind of where it came about. What's interesting though is that you say the title fits perfectly. That wasn't the original title.
Ah.
The When it was written, the first draft or second draft, or whatever, it was under the title of The Dark. Um, I was always a big fan of uh, James Herbert's book, The Dark. Um, and so I think I was partly inspired by that. But then a film came out when I was writing it called The Dark. So I was like, right, that's scrapped. Changed the title to Crawl Space. And it was actually
Mm.
filmed under that title. So if you ever see stuff on set, see the clapperboards and stuff like that, it all say Crawl Space on it. So that's the title when we were filming it. And then even then, I was like, oh, we'll stick with it for now. And I know it's not right.
Yeah.
And then as we were editing it, I came up with The Descent as
Mm.
like it found its right title.
Mm.
Um, and the rest is history. But like it's once I came up with it, it was like, ah, it's obvious now.
Hmm.
So,
I love that. That makes sense because crawl space is so specific to something like within that cave, right? Whereas the
yeah.
descent opens up the scope a lot more, to the things that we were just talking about before, and it just it's the perfect name for the movie. It like fits so damn well, and I'm pleased it
Well,
got
that was
that.
it. It was like once I clicked with The Descent, it was like, oh, it's got multiple meanings because I love a title with multiple meanings.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh, that fits perfectly. Yeah,
Absolutely. And I mean, it's so interesting what you were saying there, 'cause, earlier on you were talking about how horror is, like it's a cheaper kind of, movie to make. And that makes sense of when you were pitching this initially in that zombie movie on the oil rig, which sounds crazy good, by the way, obviously didn't get made. And then you went with this, which makes sense because it's like, it's easier. It's very much one location for a lot of the movie. And like you're in the darkness. So like, you can work with different elements with lighting and such like that as well. Now,
yeah.
this movie, obviously, we have a lot of it takes place, majority of it takes place in the caves. We do have the beautiful outback of where it takes place as well.
Yeah.
We've got some claustrophobic sets. Like the monster design is really interesting. So, how did you find like when you were making the movie, Neil? Like, what were some of the challenges when you were like working with like such liminal space and like coming up with the monster designs? Like, and what were the challenges along the way with making it?
I don't know. I suppose like there was a certain amount of freedom when I was writing this thing, which you kind of get more jaded and cynical as you get older and older, but and the experience rubs into what you're doing,
Yeah.
rubs off on you. So when I was writing The Descent, I didn't have a clue how we were going to make it, and it didn't even cross my mind, like how are we actually going to do this.
Mm.
Uh, it didn't occur to me that we weren't going to film in caves. It was like, surely we were just going to find a cave or find a dark room and do it in that, because it was always an aesthetic that I had in my mind that um, we were going to film it. There was going to be a lot of darkness in this film. This is the whole point, was like it's going to be like little pools of light and things happening in there, and huge swathes of the screen will just be black.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that that came from so I was on a school trip when I was about 11, 12 or something like that, and they took us down a slate mine or a lead mine. That was it. It took us down a lead mine. A bunch of kids down a lead mine. You'd never be allowed to do that now, but like back
No
then it
way.
was like, oh, I'll just take the kids down the lead mine. They'll be fine. And yeah, and when they get down and got to the bottom of the lead mine, and somebody said, okay, you've got to everybody turn their torches off, and experienced pitch black for the first time, like true pitch black. You're waving your hand in front of your eyes, you can't see a thing. And that's when the guy says, "Don't anybody walk away. There's a 200-foot drop just over there." You're like, these things like stick in your subconscious. Um, Nobody did walk away. Everybody turned the lights back on, and we all got home safely. But it stuck in my mind. This pitch black thing was like, okay, if I'm going to do a caving film, I got to tap into that somehow. And then it was the logic of, okay, that we'll limit ourselves. This is me talking to the DP here, who's also a Geordie, by the way. Um,
Nice.
Sam McCurdy, who I've worked with for several years before we made this on various things in Newcastle. I was like, okay, our challenge is the only light sources that we're going to have in this film are what the characters take into the cave with them. And we don't want them all to be the same. And we want to know what, we've got to track everybody at any point has to have something with them that we can light the scene with, be it a box of matches, a flare, a snap light, a video camera, whatever it is, and figure out who's got what and where at any one time. So that was a process that came into writing the script of not only tracking the light sources, but trying to give different characters, different groups, a different kind of light source. So like it would be a easy visual reference. As soon as you saw the green light, you knew it was Sam and Rebecca. As soon as you saw the red light, it was Sarah or the fire, and so these various kind of light sources became signals for who you were seeing. But then, as the process went on, got the production designer involved, and he was like, we'll the only way we can do this is to build these caves, because we're never going to find one cave that has all the specific bits in that you've mentioned, and we won't be able to do anything. It's a cave. It's like rock. We can't just like stick things to the walls or add lights in and things like that. It's like it's a cave. So I knew that was going to be a problem. I knew like we were never going to find all the bits that we wanted specifically that we could control, that wouldn't be completely lethal, because me and the cast went caving in pre-production as a kind of as a research trip as much as anything. But what that told me very clearly was that if we tried to make this film in a real cave, we were all going to die. Because it was just nuts down there. We went caving in the Peak District. We did everything that's in the film. We abseiled down waterfalls into black pits so that we couldn't see the bottom of. We crawled into super tiny holes and crawling along to get the claustrophobia thing. And it was incredibly educational for us. But what also happened was that then there was only a group of like 10 of us. Being in the cave for, I don't know, less than an hour, our breath alone fogged the cave up, so you couldn't see anything. It just, your breath instantly like condenses, and suddenly like there's fog everywhere, and that fog hits the rock, and the rock turns to ice, and it's just like, oh my god, this is going to be so, we can't do it this way. Anyway, so my production designer found this incredible solution to make the sets cheaply, and also to utilize, because he's brilliant at this, Simon Bowles, absolute legend, utilizing the same sets over and over again, but in different forms, or just rejigging them slightly rather than having to have a new set every time. Because most of the time it's in the dark. Half the time the actors never point their light at the same place twice, so you really wouldn't have a clue. And it's much simpler to just like respray the cave a different color, or move some boulders around, and suddenly it's a different cave. And you really have no idea. So I think one of the sets we used something like 15 times throughout the movie. It was like literally like, where we're going to shoot this scene, we're going to have to, we're going to go back to that one again. Okay, But the biggest cave set we used 3 or 4 times throughout the movie. It was a huge backdrop that became the first cathedral cavern, then it became like the stalagmite chamber, and then it became something else. So it was just really clever production design. Saved us a lot of money on that. And yeah, so, and then the exterior stuff, I quickly concluded that the best place to shoot that was up in Scotland. So we went up to Pitlochry for like a week and a half, I think it was, to do all of the whitewater rafting and the driving and any of the exterior stuff, helicopter stuff as well, of the driving, to give it that scope. And then we went back down to London. We ended up filming in Pinewood Studios, which was second feature on my shooting. Legendary Pinewood Studios, unbelievable. On a couple of small stages there, and this was in January, so it was absolutely freezing. There was no heating on the stages, and the actresses were specifically being soaked every day, because we always had hose pipes or spritzers in the air just filling. There was something in the air inside the caves, so it never looked too clean. And that just meant like after every take they had to be like sat next to a heater with a thermal blanket on before hypothermia set in, because they were really pushed to the limit. But they were a tough bunch of gals, so it was okay.
Oh man, that's incredible. This is the gold that I love of like learning about, like when you've got a favorite movie, like everything that happened like around getting it made, and that's brilliant. Like I love that. I love that you guys went and literally did some caving just to get the experience and the feel for it, right? And that
Yeah,
comes across in the movie, like it absolutely does. And
I
as
think
well,
it
like
definitely
just
paid off. Yeah,
100%. And like even just the camaraderie between the girls, like
yeah.
that really does come into it. Like I don't know if some of it, like if it was all like in the script, whether some of it was ad-libbed, but when they're just sitting in the cabin having a good time and chatting, that just feels so real. Like they've known each other for so long, you know?
Yeah, well, certainly there was a lot of it in the script. There was a lot of it in discussions with them prior to filming, and then sometimes while we were filming, like we'd all sit down together and like figure out a way to say certain lines or do a scene that would be work better based on what we knew of them and their characters at that point.
Mm,
That there was always room for improvement, and I always
right,
figured that they know what they're talking about.
right.
Um, so yeah, and it's I say now it's like one of the things I'm most proud of is not just the film itself, but for the fact that I created this group of friends
Yeah.
that are still friends to this day, that are still like, a really, they're still really, really close mates. And I think that as an achievement is like, second to none. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, but you're asking about the creatures as well, the crawlers.
Hmm.
My my inspiration for them was Iggy Pop. It's like I wanted to make them like Iggy Pop, a bald Iggy Pop, like that weird physicality of like being skinny but muscular.
Mm,
And certainly, like I was inspired by Nosferatu and the Master
mm,
from Salem's Lot and
yeah.
stuff like that. Probably less Gollum, to be honest. It was I didn't really think about Gollum that much. It was mainly these vampiric creatures from other films, and trying to bring other elements to them. And then Paul Hyatt came on board and started designing them. And it was him who like came up with the idea that some of them, like their eyes, are starting to kind of basically seal up because they don't
Mm,
need them anymore. They're all blind. They're always going to be blind, but um, having them with their eyes almost like starting to seal up and things like that was really interesting.
mm,
Um, and then giving them the ears and all that stuff. And then a lot of the rest of it was I ended up like casting this bunch of Geordies who I knew from like that was like a theatre group in the Northeast, who all had that kind of physicality to them,
mm,
and I thought it was better to get like actors in the roles rather than specific creature performers or mime artists or something like that. And they all worked as a group, like did lots of rehearsals with them, figuring out how they would move and attack people and practicing attack moves and stuff like that.
mm.
And I'd always said that I imagined them being like spiders. And I always thought the things like spiders that's creepy is that spider will just kind of sit there for ages, and then all of a sudden it'll just go,
Yeah.
scuttle
Yeah.
every. So I was like, how can we mimic that kind of thing? So, I we came up with some camera stuff as well that we whenever the crawlers are on screen, they're always filmed at 18 frames a second just to give them that little speed bump, but not too
Mm.
much. And filmed it with a 90-degree shutter, so that made it really staccato. It's the Saving Private Ryan thing. It's the gives them that staccato thing, and that really helped with that kind of weird, scuttly kind of vibe that they had.
Mm. And like, oh, like two of my favorite moments in the movie, are like creature moments, and it's like the way that the shot is set up is beautiful. I mean, you talked like so great there about the lighting, and one of them in particular is when after Sarah's like, dive down into the pool and she like climbs out and she has the torch in her hand, but she lays down on the rock and the creature crawls on top of her and just like looks. That
Yeah,
silhouette, that for me, that's a shot that needs to be on my wall. That's an incredible picture. But as well, the other moment, which this for me is one of the best scenes. I'm not just saying this because you're here. I've said this a million times. One of the best scenes shot in any horror movie is in this film. And it's when Sarah and Juno are like rounding the corner for their like final last stand, like against the monsters. And as they come round the corner, the camera just looks and they're just there waiting and they're
yeah,
perfectly still. That shot, Neil, is incredible because there's no dialogue and we just know what's going to happen and the tension is there. But just the presence of those creatures, like I think there's three on the screen, like on different levels, and they're just, for all
yeah.
that they're blind, they're facing in the direction of our two heroes by the end, and we know what's going to go down. And that is incredible. I absolutely love that. Like that for me is, as I said, it's one of the best scenes shot in a horror movie ever. Because everything that we know about the movie, everything that we know is going to happen with no dialogue, is said with that scene alone, and it's incredible. So yeah, like I love what you said there about the creatures. It makes complete sense when you see them crawl around like on the walls and everything like that. It is very spider-like. It's very, its limbs like moving very quickly, and you
Yeah.
can see that. And like another great creature moment when we first see it on the camcorder and it's standing right next to her, like in the green light, and it's kind of just like looking down at her, like twisting the head a little bit. It's so creepy, but in the best way. It's like we recognize we see that humanoid creature, but it's like off. We're like, oh. And then as the viewer, we're trying to figure out what is that? And it's done really, really well. I love it. I love the creature design.
Yeah, no, it was really quite simple because it was prosthetics on the face, and then the rest of it was all just like them and their own physique, but like with lots of layers of kind of body paint on. So they had like there was a pale color with veins, and then given this kind of shimmer afterwards, and it was all translucent and slightly weird, and a lot of KY jelly smeared all over them as well um, to make them disgusting, but very cold. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, it all works. But I want to obviously I've touched a little bit on the character of Sarah here, but I want to talk about the actress Shauna MacDonald.
Hmm.
Like the role of Sarah itself. I mean, I as an actor, we were kind of talking before hitting record. That's the type of role for me is my dream to go from like by the end I'm a different character and like that evolution of like what happens. Like for me, this is the movie. Like if I could pick a movie I could ever star in, it would be The Descent because this is my ballpark. I love it. The character of Sarah for me and like Shauna McDonald just knocked it out the park. I mean, she is incredible. She plays so much from like portraying motherhood, like to being in a relationship, the fear and anxiety, because she is very scared in the beginning of the movie. When the bats come out, she's like having an anxiety attack. There's all of this going on. To then by the end is just this primal fighter, like with a bone in her hand, with a torch in her hand. I love the look of her hair, like where it's long and it's just matted in blood. And there's that one moment when she's looking at Juno and she looks at her and she just looks off with her eyes like that and then looks back at her. It's just, again, it's so much face acting. It's beautifully done. So tell me, like, what was it like working with Sean McDonald and crafting the character of Sarah with her?
Um, well, I mean, first of all, like Shauna went through a fairly long audition process. She came in and she was amazing, and then, we brought her back, and then we brought her back again. It was like so, it was tough for her, but like every time she came in, she just like raised the bar and was just better and better. And it came to a point where it was just like it's just staring us in the face. It's like that's our Sarah,
Yeah.
and we did stuff in the audition thing of like, well, I lined up chairs and had them do like the crawling under the chairs, crawling to
Nice.
be a tunnel. So, because I think we had Beth at that point. So Alex Reed came in and she was like crawling the other way, and they would just do the scene underneath some chairs in a room. But even that helped a little. I think it helped them get a sense of what I was going to do. But yeah, Shauna just, killed that role. It was one of the beauty things of it was, although we did all the exteriors first, narratively, most of that was all at the front of the film, with the one exception of the escape at the end, and that was the only bit kind of significantly out of order that we did, because when we went back to Pinewood, we essentially shot the film in linear order
Hmm.
because we could, because the way that the cave story works is that they never revisit the same cave twice. So we were able to essentially tell the story narratively there. So her journey as the character was, as we were filming it, which is like very rare, but
Hmm.
worked perfectly. And so much so that the last shot of the movie was the last shot that we filmed of the movie. Like on the final day, the final shot on the final day was the last shot of the movie. And it was like there was nobody else left. We'd killed them all off one by one by one, and it was just her and actually my niece Molly playing her daughter.
Oh, nice.
That were on there on the last day, but actually because of the way the film had gone, and the camaraderie with it was like everybody came back for the last day. All the cast came back for the last day, and it was quite a celebration. So. But yeah, but Shauna's journey into darkness was, step by step by step by step, and guiding her through that all the way. And yeah, I mean, I'm glad you pointed out that look that she gives, where she looks away and she looks back,
Hmm.
and that look that she gives Juno is just brutal.
Mm.
It's so iconic. I think it's just so strong. But also the screaming with the blood and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Turning her into this, primal warrior. Really back to
Mhm.
basic stuff of like killing things with a bone. I was like, okay, like how much can we kind of regress here that she's almost by the end of it become one of the crawlers.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. But you're right, like you mentioned, like the screaming, like that's, her covered in blood and lifting the head and screaming, like that for me. You might have seen Neil, but I on my Instagram I recreated that. So I did like a Halloween. I was taking different movies that I love around Halloween, and I was putting myself in them. And I did one where I took Shauna out and I put myself in there on the front cover, and it was me screaming, holding the torch and holding the pickaxe. And I love that. It's so iconic for that. And I was like, I need to recreate this for Halloween. So I did, and I think you liked it as well. But yeah, like that's an iconic shot for that. And again, that primal just scream like says everything about her character at that point. It's
Yeah.
like everything that's happened to her, the kind of evolution of where she's going towards as well. It's almost like that's her last part of humanity going out of her in that scream, because now we're going into this primal instinct, and that's what I really love about it as well. All of this just pays off in her performance. She nailed it, as you said. She nailed it.
But also, I mean, little details of that was, as you say, it's her humanity finally. She's flipping up, crossing over to the other side, and when it cuts away from that shot, it cuts to the other girls, and the scream that you hear in the background is not Shauna; it's a crawler.
Mhm.
So it's like that all brings the whole discussion into play of like how real are the crawlers? Are they actually a figment of her psychosis, or are they real and such like? So is it actually Shauna who's going around killing everybody? And it doesn't. I mean, if you start analyzing that, it probably doesn't make sense, and it was never meant to. But I love the fact that there are theories around that now, of whether it's all just a figment of Sarah's imagination, and could well be.
So I love the ambiguity in that, where there isn't any direct answer. It's up to you to interpret that and find out, what do you
No,
think?
100%. I would never say one way or the other. It's
Yeah.
like leave it to everybody who watches it to figure it out for themselves and take what
Mhm.
they want from it. I think that's the beauty of a film like The Descent, is it doesn't give too much, it gives just enough, and then the rest everybody brings to it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the best way to approach that theory. And that's why we still talk about it today. It's still got that lasting impact of, when you go back to it, you can see something differently every time. And that's what I love about that.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the ending of the movie, Neil, you did touch on it there, obviously, with your niece. And I have to say, obviously, there's two endings. So I love obviously the OG ending, which is, it looks like she's made this grand escape. She's driving away, she's getting out of there, she stops, she vomits, and then as she comes back up, Juno's right next to her. And then we cut to that. Her eyes are back open again. She's still in the cave. And like, I love that you can, she's sitting there looking at her daughter, the birthday cake, which is a reoccurring kind of image that comes out throughout the movie. And like, again, she's holding the torch, and then as the camera pans away, she's just not there and she's just staring. That for me, and then you can hear the crawlers in the background as well. That for me is the perfect ending. That is the ending. Now, obviously, there is the American cut of when, she is driving away, she vomits, she sees Juno, camera cuts, end. What did you think of that ending?
Um, well, so I mean, the reason that it came about was when we were making the film, and this was like in January of 2004, I think, or 2005. I can't remember exactly what it was. 2004, I think. We heard that there was another film being made called The Cave. It was a bigger, but it was like there hadn't been a cave movie in years, and all of a sudden two come along at once. It was one of those classic things. Another horror movie set in a cave called The Cave, and we knew it was a Hollywood production. It had, a much, much bigger budget than we had. It had stars in it. We were like, okay, we're going to get absolutely, floored by this thing. There's one chance. What if we get ours into the cinema before it?
Hmm.
Which miraculously we did. So because we were filming in January, and we had it in cinemas in July.
Wow.
Uh, so in the UK
Yeah.
specifically, we managed to absolutely power through post production and did test screenings and things like that, and Pathé released it in the UK in July. Um, so we beat The Cave in the UK, but when Lionsgate picked it up for the US, they were like, "Whoa, hold on, let's just take a breath. And they said, well, we're going to wait until after the cave comes out, see how it does, and then we're going to go afterwards. As it turned out, the cave came out in August, didn't get great reviews, didn't do great business. It wasn't really much of a threat as it turned out. And Lionsgate then were like, okay, we're going to take it to Sundance for a big launch there, and then we'll release it, early next year. So that was like one part of it. So it was almost like a year later that it was going to get released in the US. By that time, it was already available on DVD in the States, on Amazon. It had played theatrically like everywhere else in the world except the US, pretty much, and Canada. And Lionsgate got back to me and the producer and said, look, we've done some test screenings, and while the original version tested really, really well, we tried snipping off the end a bit, and it went through the roof. Like the test scores went through the roof. So you have a choice. Like we can release the original version, and we'll put it out on like 1,000 screens, or if you let us, we'll trim the ending and we'll put it out on 3,000 screens. It's up to you. And we talked it out and said, look, at the end of the day, the version that we wanted to make exists. Most people in the world have seen it. Anybody in the States can go on Amazon and buy it on DVD if they want to. And this will get us a huge amount of exposure and whatever. It's not a bad deal. And so we agreed to let them do that. It was always my opinion, because it's to do with American audiences and test screenings and not fully understanding the mentality, because the theory is that the US version is the happy ending. But I actually think that's completely the other way around. I think the happiest version of an ending that she could ever have after what she's been through is the UK version, where she's in here is with her daughter. And that's the only happiness she's going to get. So I think that's the happier ending in that sense. I think the version where she escapes, it's kind of like, okay, she's literally out of the cave, but she's probably insane. I mean, or certainly insane. All her family's still dead. All her friends are now dead as well. She's probably going to be held responsible for all that. I mean, she's almost certainly going to end up in some kind of psycho ward somewhere. Like, this is not a happy ending. This is an awful ending for her. She's breathing, fresh air, and she can see the sky, but that's about it. She's probably going to end up locked in a very dark cell for a very long time. So I didn't really see it as a happy ending, but that's just the way it goes. And we got the bigger release, and what they would play gangbusters in the States. So I'm not complaining. I just think it's a difference of opinion more than anything. Of course, the original ending then became very regularly, easily available, more available in the States on Blu-ray and DVD when it was the unrated version, which is just the last 30 seconds put back on again. And there it is.
Yeah, that's fair. You know what? That makes complete sense of what you've said about it. Yeah, like absolutely. And obviously, that American ending then allowed for the sequel to be made. Did you have any hand in that at all? Was that completely separate from you? Did you watch it?
Well, I have seen it years ago. I haven't watched it since. Very disappointed by it. I mean, when it was first said to me, like, let's do a sequel, I was like, no, don't do a sequel. It's a standalone film. It doesn't need a sequel. Unfortunately, the powers that be who owned the rights to it were like, well, we're going to make one anyway. And I was like, well, I don't know what are you going to pick up from the UK ending, the US ending? As it turned out, they picked up from neither. The film that was released doesn't work with either ending. Like, it doesn't make any sense how Sarah gets out the cave. There was, I believe, I suggested to them, I said, look, what if she jumps off the ledge and she lands in water and gets kind of flushed out of the cave somehow, and then she comes out of a lake somewhere. And I don't know if they actually filmed it or not, but that was the principle of it. But they never really made it happen, and it certainly isn't in the movie. Beyond that, my thing was, look, I can't stop you from making it, but you have to compel Sarah to go back into that cave. And like, what might compel Sarah to go back into that cave? I don't know. Maybe a child getting lost in the caves might compel her to go back in the caves. I don't know. But what you don't want to do is have her like lose her memory and be taken back into the caves without anyone. And that's exactly what they ended up doing. And I could tell immediately, like, that the whole kind of mind state of the producers was like, well, nobody cares about how she gets back in the cave. They just want to see the monsters in the cave. And I was like, as the producers of the movie, if all you're taking away from it is it's about monsters in the cave and that's all the audience want to see, then you really haven't a clue what made the first film work. And you're going to fuck this one up. And ultimately, that's what they did.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and so, and it's interesting, just even from a script point of view, they didn't think about how it was going to be lit. So they wrote scenes where nobody would have a source of light, which put Sam in a really difficult position of like, I'm going to have to light the cave or else you're not see anything because you haven't written me something for them. So all the effort that we put in on the first film, they didn't put in on the second one. And it shows. It's a very different looking film. It looks cheaper. It looks nastier.
yeah, yeah,
And it's no fault of Sam's. He was left with no choice. And, um, so it's one of those things that, was shouldn't have been done, but it was done anyway.
yeah.
Um,
It's unfortunate. Yeah, I get it. Like even like me, like because I've watched it once, and again I was similar. I was like to you. I was like, oh, are we doing this? Like, is this what we're doing? And then yeah, like just like Sarah's character just feels very different. Like as you
yeah.
said at the beginning, like oh, like it's a loss of memory, and like that whole journey that we've gone through with Sarah, it's kind of like a right. Let's just write that off and start again in a weird way, and I think it kind of undermines a lot of the first movie in many ways. And it's a big
Well, it
shame.
totally does. And it's kind of like, I think any sequel that detracts from the first movie is a bad sequel.
Yeah.
And so, the fact that Juno shows up again is kind of like,
Right.
she left her to die. That was the point. Like,
Hmm.
if she comes back and then they're all going to be chums again. Like, well, that's not going to make sense. It's like just ridiculous. Um, so all of that kind of stuff was just like, oh no. And then not only did they bring her back, but like they stole her trousers.
Yeah.
So like suddenly she's walking around in these like hot pants and stuff like that. I'm like, what?
Right.
Like
Right.
this was exactly what we didn't do in the
Yeah.
first film. Like Juno comes back and she's got all this like coiffured hair and her pants are all cut off, and it's like, no, no,
Right,
don't go there.
exactly. This part of the podcast, I always do this with every guest that I have on, Neil, is where I ask them about some of their favorite things to do with what they do. So, you're a director. I need to ask you. Obviously, I'm not saying give me your set in stone, your top five or top three, but just generally, and you mentioned like Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark earlier. But if you sit down and you think like, wow, this movie makes my top five, which movies are we talking about?
I guess there would be a few horror films in there. Alien, for one.
Yeah,
American Werewolf in London,
great
things
movie.
like that. Certainly The Shining and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's like there's a period of time when I was like watching The Howling. I was like watching a lot of horror films, and they're the ones that really inspired me in my career
Mm,
and still remain like my favorite horror films, like The Thing and The
yeah.
Fog. John Carpenter, most of John Carpenter's films, pretty much. Massive inspiration for me.
Hmm.
Um, and one of my heroes that I have managed to meet and wasn't a disappointment. Uh,
Nice.
so people like that. Um, Older movies as well. Like I love old westerns. I'm a big fan of The Wild Bunch and
Hmm.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and some great stuff like that. But also things like Lawrence of Arabia and
Mm.
Bridge Too Far. Great war movies. I'm a big fan of war movies. Um, and historical stuff as well.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, all kinds of things really. I mean, I'm very much a student of cinema as a whole. Like
Yeah.
everything from Buster Keaton, Jackie Chan to
Hmm.
John Woo and John Ford, Howard
Hmm.
Hawks, and then the icons that I grew up on, which is Spielberg and John Carpenter and George Lucas and people like that.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned like as well, even talking about Jackie Chan and like movies like that with John Woo, especially, you've got some great action stuff in there as well. So you
Yeah.
can see like the inspiration coming from there, but also like you've got a lot of like ensemble choice in there as well. And you can see like the elements of like Alien is like the great final girl movie, where you've got that right at the end, and you can see that in The Descent. And then, like the action that you've picked out there as well, like even the scale of something like Lawrence of Arabia, you can see that in something like Centurion. Like other big movies like that in Game of Thrones that you've done as well. So that's really interesting. You can kind of like weave like your inspirations through your work there, and I think that's
Oh, definitely. I mean,
you
certainly
see it.
what I consider to be the kind of the holy trinity of early Spielberg, which is,
Mm,
Jaws, Close Encounters, and Raiders, is like
yeah.
that's perfect three movies. Um, and other stuff during the '80s as well, Back to the Future, Predator, Die
Mm,
Hard, um, um, things like The Warriors, all
hmm
these films that I just absorbed in as a teenager, and really stuck in there, and it's like just to feed everything that I've done since, really.
Yeah, no, it absolutely shows in your work, man. And speaking of your work going forward, Neil, just to wrap up, obviously I'm not, asking you to divulge all your secrets of what's happening next, but can you talk anything about, maybe what could potentially be coming up night next for Neil Marshall? What have you got going on? What you'd like to do in the future?
I'm developing a number of projects. It's just, it's never easy to get one thing off the ground. It would be nice to just concentrate on one thing, but you have to have a lot of plates spinning because you just don't
Yeah.
know how it's going to work. But
Mhm.
so, I mean, I've just finished writing. It's a World War II set alien invasion story.
Ooh,
Um,
nice.
which is kind of in the spirit of things like the Goonies and stuff like that, because like that kind of thing, like Attack of the Block meets the Goonies or Stranger Things or something like that.
Yeah.
So that, and started writing a revenge thriller, which is actually set in Newcastle, which I thought I've never actually made anything in Newcastle. I mean, I made years and years ago I did, but since I've become like a director, I've never gone back to Newcastle and made something. So I thought I'd love to do a really gritty revenge action, like a straight up action film, like just to. I want to get some real show-stopping fight sequences in there, kind of like a
Yes.
Jason Statham kind of movie, but set in
Mhm.
Newcastle.
Yes.
So I'm starting to write that now. I've got I've got all sorts of stuff. I've got like a western. I've got a thriller set in a traffic jam. I've got all sorts of things that I've got my kind of dream project is this Indiana Jones, James Bond, Die Hard kind of hybrid set during World War II, which I desperately want to make one day. But I'll keep plugging away, keep plugging away.
Yeah, got some good plates spinning there, Neil. Wow. I mean, that movie set in Newcastle, I can't wait to see a fight on the Tyne Bridge. I can't wait to see a fight in Big Market. Like, I am excited for that movie, man. Like, that's like, yeah, in Central Station, like, let's see something happen in there. Like, I am super excited for this. Like, Northumberland Street, let's go. I'm super excited to see that, man. That's incredible. Um, but that's super exciting, Neil. That's incredible. And yeah, you've got some great stuff that you're teasing us with there, and I can't wait to check them out in the future. But
No,
yeah,
gotta make them happen.
absolutely. Let everybody know, Neil, where can they find you on social media to check out all your other stuff and what you've got going on?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Neil Marshall Director, and I have a website, also www.neilmarshalldirector.com, and there's like links and trailers and stuff for all of my work there and various bits and bobs.
There you go. So make sure you go and check out all of that. And also check out Neil's latest movie, Duchess, which is available everywhere. Make sure you go and check that out as well. Neil, I have to say, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. This for me hasn't just been like a pleasure, but it's just been an absolute joy. Like, to speak to a director who is from my neck of the woods, who created one of my favorite movies of all time, like, it doesn't get better than that. So, honestly, thank you for taking the time to do this, man. I really
Well, you're
do
welcome. I'm
appreciate
just
it.
glad we managed to sort it out. It was a lot of stops and starts, but we got there in the end.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's weather. We're all governed by weather, right? So absolutely,
Yeah,
but we did get
but
here.
yeah,
But yeah, no, thank you, man. I just want to say, everybody, this podcast is available on all streaming platforms as well as YouTube. So if you do want to watch Neil and I and our very handsome faces talk to each other, then make sure you check that out on YouTube as well. And yeah, give us a like, give us a subscribe, and everything like that as well. But again, Neil, I want to say a big thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thank you.
All right, and take care, guys. Until next time.